Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Blumira Briefings. As you may be able to see, Nick and I are on the road this week, and we have our first ever guest joining us this week. First, I want to welcome Dennis Fisher, InfoSec journalist extraordinaire and editor-in-chief of Decipher, who is joining us today to add a little bit of perspective. We're very excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. This is great. I'm excited.
And back joining us this week, we have Nick Dixon from Blumira from our security operations team.
Hey everyone, happy to be back. Thank you.
And Jake Ouellette from our detection engineering team. And we've got a couple of good stories for Jake this week, too.
Oh, yeah. I saw the queued up one for detection engineering specifically, so I'm ready.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm not above a little bit of like fan service. We want to try and give people their areas of focus. So we are going to switch it up a little bit this week. We always try and make sure to get those critical update stories out for software or services that you watching at home may be most likely using. So this week, we're going to start with those before we dive into the trends of the week. Up first, Apple has announced and released some patches, 18.5 for iOS and iPadOS, to patch a number of major security flaws. There were about 30 bugs affecting everything from Apple JPEG and core media that could allow exploit through malicious media files. Some file parsing vulnerabilities, a mute button failure that would allow audio to come through even if a call was muted in FaceTime, WebKit flaws, and Jake, you called out one that I had skimmed over also, that there was a notes bug that was announced that could expose data from a locked iPhone screen.
Yeah, this one stuck out to me in particular just because, I've always been an iPhone user, and I've been in security for the longest time, and that whole feature of being able to use different parts of your phone without unlocking it has always kind of like maybe not raised a red flag for me, but at least made me question like, well, what else can I do on the phone without having to unlock it? So this is just another one of those things that I was like, oh, cool, another thing that we might be able to do without needing somebody's password or PIN.
Yeah. So this one, Apple has said they had no announcement that these bugs were exploited in the wild, but especially as these are some of the most frequently used devices, and depending on the state of your environment and whether users have their own devices or you're issuing them, it's definitely an important vector to pay attention to. So make sure that you are getting those updates installed. There are also updates available for Mac OS, Apple TV, and the others. However, across the Apple ecosystem, however, those flaws in iOS and iPadOS were some of the top noted. As usual, in the description, we're going to have a link to the original advisory, which will include all of the related CVEs and links for you. We're going to speed on through because this one, I think, is a little bit more interesting for us to talk about. So there was an advisory released by ASUS that a flaw in DriverHub let malicious sites run commands with admin rights. And I thought this was kind of interesting. So this was some research done by a researcher with the amazing name of Mr. Bruh, who found a critical flaw in DriverHub, which was a driver management utility that is baked in on ASUS motherboards. The way that this service works is it runs in the background as an administrator on local port 5300. It detects and then fetches updated driver versions automatically for the user. There is some validation happening. It checks if the origin header of those incoming requests are coming from driverhub.asus.com. The issue is it will actually accept a request from any site that includes that string and not actually that originating site. This could be exacerbated by the fact that DriverHub is allowed to download and run files that are from ASUS without user confirmation. So this opens up a potential attack flow where a user could be lured to a malicious site, spoof the header to include that validation domain string, and then send a request to that device at local port 5300. Then malware could basically be treated as though it was coming from ASUS, downloaded and run without any user indication or interaction. Now, the researcher who released this information did do a search for TLS certs that matched that kind of included embedded string and didn't find any. So it seems like this has likely not been exploited in the wild. The CVE details, and this is CVE 2025, 3462 and 63. The details were added by ASUS, and it said that it does not affect laptops, desktops, or other endpoints, only motherboards. It is worth noting it could affect any device that has DriverHub installed. It is installed and baked in by default on Mobos, but can be installed on other devices. So if you have an ASUS Mobo, at the very least, make sure that you go and download and install that update. And if you aren't a super big fan of bloatware that can do things arbitrarily on your machine without any prompting, you can go into the BIOS and disable that.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Zoe, is bloatware. I
Yeah.
don't know if anyone's bought a laptop recently, but oh my gosh, the amount of things that come with these laptops is insane. You got to go through and just uninstall this stuff.
It's
Truly.
wild. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And even like a lot of the Chromebooks, which are meant to be stripped down, very simple to use, you just start it up, enter your Google stuff and go. Even those now, you're like, what is all this nonsense
Yeah.
on here? And, this story reminded me of, there's lots of these, but there's all kinds of these little utilities that most users have no idea run on or what they do. And the researcher noted that this thing doesn't even have a GUI. So, there's no real way for the typical user to go and find this thing and be like, no, I don't want that, kill that. And it's running in the background, just downloading essentially whatever drivers it wants. So you're kind of like at its mercy in a lot of ways,
Yeah, I love the record scratch in this article, and I saw you starting to respond to it, where it's like this issue is limited to motherboards and does not affect laptops, desktop computers, or other endpoints. Like, what are those things running on if not motherboards?
Right.
Same question.
Yeah. Are they using other motherboard brands for their laptops?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those lines that you see in security advisories all the time that that PR and or legal threw in there, and you're like, all right, I know what that means.
I also thought this one was kind of interesting in the fact that this is like bloatware that's like somehow baked into the BIOS, which is a little unusual. Normally you'd have just like the bloatware in Windows and all the other stuff, like McAfee and all that other stuff that comes with those endpoints. But most of the time you don't see like toggle switches for those things in the BIOS, which it seems like there is for this one. So this is like an extra added step of like, you're not going to get away with it just by uninstalling it. You actually have to go into the BIOS and disable it, apparently, which is something that could be like, I can only imagine being a million times more frustrating for like remote administrators or people trying to like manage these endpoints.
Yeah.
Even the most diligent user that is constantly updating their machines, updating all the software, they might even miss this one because it's not plainly listed anywhere. It's deep in the BIOS.
Well, and I think this is this is important for anyone who's using ASUS hardware, but even if you aren't, I think that this is a good reminder to consider the potential implications of these automatically installed utilities, bloatware, smells like synergy, that can operate with, elevated privileges and sometimes, like in this case, without even any notice. So we always like to try and make sure that we're giving some real perspective and actionable advice. So before we move on, to our panel, what would you advise? How can teams kind of try and mitigate that potential risk if they aren't sure if there are some of these utilities to try and keep their users safe?
The first thing that came to my head, and this is from my previous life as a sysadmin, is just having a hardened, standardized version of whatever you're rolling out. I mean, I know that's not everybody can do that, and a lot of times, especially nowadays, we have people using phones or bring their own devices to bring add to that. But if you deploy laptops, if you're giving out laptops to your users, you should have a standardized deployment. You should know what stuff is installed, and also reduce just overall. Like if you shouldn't be deploying endpoints with bloatware, and if you do have any kind of like driver update stuff like this, like my old shop used to use Dell, so we'd always let people have whatever the Dell like little add-on is that they had. I mean, technically it's kind of like bloatware, but it does help you with updates and stuff like that. So it's less of like, sometimes you can't really know these things. You can't really predict them, but you can at least have an understanding of like when something like this does come out, like how does it impact me? And then like, how am I going to respond to it? So as long as you know it's there and like you can understand what kind of impact it has on your like environment and your situation, that's like the first step to understanding like what your next steps are.
And I liked your note that having a default configuration with you have that known state that it is hardened. I mean, even for my personal use at this point, I keep a ready Windows install image ready to go, just so I don't have to do the back and forth dance of trying to create a local user account without tying it to a Microsoft account before I'm even in the OS. Um, Longtime listeners may have heard some Cisco woes over our last couple of episodes. We are continuing that trend this week with another 10.0 CVSS flaw in now this time iOS XE wireless hubs that can enable root exploits through a hard-coded Java Web Token. I always shiver a little bit when I hear hard-coded in a bug release. So this was a flaw that could allow arbitrary remote file upload through a remote admin interface in the XE wireless controllers in the Catalyst 9800 series. Because that authentication token is hard-coded, an attacker who has found it could then forge a custom secure HTTP request to that interface. However, doing so requires that the out-of-band AP image option be enabled, which is disabled by default. So for mitigation steps, the advisory, which again we'll link to, gives a quick way to check and see if that out-of-band feature is enabled. So it could be an indicator to take a closer look if that's something that your team has not intended to change, and also obviously to update to the latest version. I think this is certainly not a unique issue to have come up, and whether it's hard-coded tokens or hard-coded like API secrets or credentials, hard-coded secrets, when they're discovered and they're disclosed, if these aren't things that you can necessarily edit out yourself, or if we are still waiting for a patch to be delivered, what else can teams do to kind of mitigate that risk?
So I just wanted to say, before we get into the answer of that real quick, like this is quite a doozy of as of CVE. And like I don't like to bash other vendors. Everybody's got their problems. Everybody makes mistakes. This is pretty low on the amateur hour though. Like, and it's just scary because it's like, it's a token that's almost, it might as well be a password, might as well be anything else that gets you access to a system. I would expect better of Cisco, but at the same time, like I said, everybody's got their own issues, so I'm not going to harp on them too much. But it is a scary one that we have to be at least aware of. And in terms of like how we should, like what we can do to mitigate risks, stuff like this, where there's hard-coded creds or tokens, this kind of goes back to a little bit of like my last answer, like just knowing what you have. You take a step back and understand how someone can access a device like this. Like you should have a process and procedure for like kind of like understanding when these things come in and how they affect you. I mean, I know this is not the easiest task, but having like some kind of asset inventory to understand like which of your endpoints are affected. And then you can start to go about prioritizing, like getting them mitigated, like doing stuff by limiting access by IP or enabling some kind of MFA, which I think some of these Cisco devices have some kind of weird MFA with SSH, and I'm not really sure how that works, to be honest, but I've heard rumors of being able to do stuff like that. And then also just like maybe temporarily disabling public access or even any kind of like internal access, like disabling different parts of the device that hopefully won't impact your network. But if it does, like that's just the risk that you take. Like you have to make that business decision of like risk of impacting the network versus risk of being compromised. And that should also be something that's part of your procedure for handling things like these, is understanding that risk register. And also the thing that I've been seeing a lot more of that I really like is vendors have gotten into the habit of posting workarounds and like temporary mitigations. So they used to kind of just be like, here's the thing, go figure it out on your own. We don't really have any better idea of what's going on. We'll shoot out an update when we get to it. But they've been better about being like, maybe we can make people feel a little bit better about us by like, we won't have an update, or we won't have the update to fix this until maybe a couple weeks later. But at least in the meantime, here's some advice directly from us, the vendor, as to what things you can do. And I think they even had that in this one too. You could disable certain features, the APE download. Yeah. And that would help keep you safe from this.
Well, and I agree, Jake. I like that alternate workaround too, because, certainly if an update isn't available yet, that may be some of your only options, and getting that advice directly from the vendor is certainly going to help give some guidance and make it more likely that folks are going to actually do something. But also, in a perfect world, you'd be able to do updates as soon as they're available. That's always going to be our first recommendation if it's viable. But if it was a perfect world, all of our jobs would be a lot easier too. And so having alternate options when that isn't a practical reality that you can do in your environment at that exact moment, again, a imperfect solution in the right direction is still going to be better than doing nothing.
Yeah, I don't want to give them props for introducing these vulnerabilities, but it is worth mentioning that Apple, in our previous article we just spoke about, and Cisco both identified these before they were caught in the wild. So we can hopefully assume that they weren't actually exploited, but who knows? But it just highlights the importance of security research into your own products, things you're running in your environment, and constantly looking for vulnerabilities and what to patch.
And one more critical update for this week. Fortinet released some updates to fix a 0-day that had been exploited in FortiVoice. FortiVoice is their phone system line. They released a patch that would allow remote code execution through a malicious HTTP request. While the announcement was made about FortiVoice, it does also affect FortiMail, FortiNDR, FortiRecorder, and FortiCamera. I liked this advisory because, one, it again was released by Fortinet researchers. I also liked that they shared a lot of the IOCs that they discovered in the course of their research. They gave some specific IPs that attacks were seen coming from, and they also included details about what was happening after the bug was exploited. Attackers were dropping malware, they were setting cron jobs to harvest creds, they were dropping network scan scripts. So we're going to share that advisory link so that you can see all of the IPs and the affected versions. For mitigation, the first thing that they recommend, this takes advantage of a built-in debug setting called FCGI debug. The bug is only affects if it is in the non-default state, if it has been enabled. So similarly to above, you can double check if that has been enabled. You can see if you are using an affected version through the advisory link. And once again, continuing theme, a workaround option that they shared would be to disable that admin interface. And I'm glad that I didn't say that on the last story because I mistook the workaround and which one it had gotten added to. So on this one, Jake, in your research, how common are these kind of activities or behaviors? And what are some other kind of frequently seen indicators that folks, if they suspect that something might be going on, but they haven't necessarily gotten an alert or seen an advisory yet, so that they can kind of, just check under the bed and see if something's going on?
Yeah, before I get into super serious, Jake, I just want to say that Fortinet's got some like McDonald's naming convention going on in their products here. Like they've got the FortiMail, FortiRecorder. It's like McFlurry, McChicken,
Truly.
McFlurries are delicious, man. I don't know.
But yeah, I just thought, I was like, Forti recorder, wild. But yeah, in terms of like the stuff that we're seeing in this particular report, it's funny because the devices they're getting access to are probably not devices that we would normally associate with like hacks, or like you're not going to get breached and go to your phone for the first thing to be like, well, this is what did it. But you can see people are compromising these devices. And the funny thing is that to an attacker, these devices, they're using them very similarly as they would almost any other beachhead. They're maybe not doing kind of like the more advanced things that would require like a full like Linux or a Windows or Mac OS operating system. Like they couldn't harvest like creds for a lot of that stuff. But they are doing recon, which we see all the time. Like usually when they land in a network, the first thing they're doing on any device, no matter what you're landing on, is recon, figuring out where you're at, what access you have, those kinds of things. And typically they're looking to get data about the network so they can move laterally. In this case, like the report said, people they're trying to pull like network scans and trying to pull creds. I think the creds are more for maybe the phones through like, I think it was like SSH connection. So maybe some kind of like management creds. But in that case, they're probably looking for like maybe password reuse. If they see an administrator, they're just going to take all of those creds, any creds they gather, and they're just going to start spraying those against M365 or any other publicly exposed apps that you might have. To seeing if they can get access to that way. If you have RDP open or some kind of like RDP gateway, they're going to try creds against that and see if they can get on RDP, some kind of beachhead that way. And then also too, they're using cron jobs on these devices, which we see quite a bit in Linux and like Unix like systems. So like Mac OS and stuff like that too. And cron jobs, for people who aren't aware, are basically the same thing as like scheduled tasks in Windows, which scheduled tasks are also a more commonly abused feature where attackers will make these scheduled tasks so that something, whatever they set up, will constantly be checking in. So it's like a kind of like a pseudo like command and control beacon. So that way, if the computer restarts, if the phone restarts, something happens with the phone, if it gets plugged back in, then that cron job is still active, it'll reach back out. So those cron jobs and those scheduled tasks are things we see all the time in attacks.
And we'll just put a pin in that command and control beacon because that's going to be something that we'll return to in one of the later stories too. Diving into our trends of the week. So these are the weekly trends that we've noticed on Blumira platform. We break these down into categories based on their severity. So threats are indicators that we have a high confidence represent malicious activity. Suspects are going to be potentially malicious activity, concerning, certainly worthy of investigation, but we don't have a high enough confidence yet to peg that as a threat, just something that should be investigated sooner than later. And then risks are not necessarily malicious activity, but as the name suggests, potential issues that could be exploited. So going from the top here, looking at the threats of the week, once again, in the number one spot, we've got a Sophos blocked website. It's notable that this is down 20% from the previous week and still holding the number one position. We also saw a lot of Sentinel-1 alerts on unmitigated suspicious threat and Azure alerts on failed single-factor PowerShell authentication attempts. Jake, I noticed that you called out that coming in at the bottom of the list, number 10 for this week, was internal recon, all connections. How timely.
Yeah, it is number 10, but that's one that I see like red teams tripping a lot, and typically red teams and attackers, mostly because that's one of those things we were just talking about doing recon in the last story. But this detection is specifically looking for like one device trying to connect to a whole bunch of different devices over all these different ports. So it is a good like early indicator. As soon as these attackers or red teamers land in your environment, usually they're trying to run that internal reconnaissance to see where they can jump to next or what their next target should be.
Yeah, and even the honeypot one just above it at number 9, same with, tripping up the red team, or the red team are tripping that one up as well. Those pretty much go hand in hand from what we've seen.
Yeah, the thing that kind of jumped out at me from these is how many of them are related to identity attacks, which is where things are going or have been going for a couple of years now. If you want to think about all the scattered spider type activity and all the other groups that are kind of following in their tracks, so many of those attacks are, in one way or another, identity or MFA exhaustion or things like that they've had tons and tons of success with.
Absolutely. Well, why try and get persistence on one system when you can try and get a master key for everywhere in the house, right?
Totally. Yep.
So next up on that suspect list, I think I don't know if we've had more than 1 week that we haven't had a remote access tool right up at the top of the list here. This week it's Splashtop. Just to kind of recap what we've really said sort of every week about this is that, these tools are really convenient for administrators, but they're also popular with attackers because they're really convenient for attackers. So if you do have to make use of one, at the very least, make sure that you have a standard policy on which tool that you're using, that you have a plan in place on how you're securing access to that tool and who is allowed to use it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Just real quick, Zoe. Another thing on convenience versus security is the batch script execution at number 3. Obviously, those batch scripts are really convenient for developers and get your job done quicker, but they blend in with all the malicious stuff that attackers are constantly using in environments.
I think that like a secondary tagline for this show is batch scripts not even once. Like it's truly, it's come up like every week.
Yep.
Let's see, we've got some potential clear text passwords on a local system, some additional Microsoft 365 alerts, suspicious inbox rule creation. So again, these are things that are concerning, but might be legitimate activity. It's just that they are commonly used maliciously and something that you will want to investigate there. Oh, and Jake, you noted a new MFA device, talking about persistence. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with what Dennis was just saying about last comments, like your IDPs and stuff, like controlling your access. This is one of those things that it might get a little bit of noise because like everybody adds new MFA devices. That's just as a standard. But it is a good thing to just double check that it was expected at least. And the way that threat actors will typically use that is after they gain access to an account, they'll typically try to add their own MFA device, so one that they control, so that even if they do get booted out or something happens where they lose access to it, they can just re-authenticate with their MFA because while MFA is secure, we do put a lot of trust in it. So since we do put a lot of trust, we have to just make sure that when these new devices are being added, that they are trusted and expected devices.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing more terrifying than getting that alert on your iPhone that's like new device added to your, Duo account or something like that. And you're just like, oh my God. And then you remember like, oh, I did that like 4 minutes ago. Just like the most like spine tingling thing is seeing something pop up in your MFA thing that you do not want, or like the unexpected push that you didn't ask for. Like, oh,
yeah.
God.
Yeah, I had a mobile authentication prompt that somehow hung. It was a legit request that it just hung, and so it kept every couple of hours. I got it prompted again for about 48 hours, and yeah, even though I had like reported it and gotten, it's just going to time out. Every time it was a little spike of cortisol still.
Yeah, I get some of those with like my son's Xbox account or whatever, like when he's logging into it at college, and I forgot that that's still my email address, and I'm like, oh shit, what's happening there? Like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I remember, forgot that from like 9 years ago. Yeah,
right. Again, our identity lives everywhere, right? So closing out this week, we've got risks. So these are issues that you can get in front of before they become problems. Topping out the list for this week, we had Microsoft 365 auth outside of the US, potential clear text password inside of Google Workspace. You should be doing those checks in your shared drives to see if any users have files that have password in them, that dreaded spreadsheet with a bunch of long passwords in it. Well, I guess at least then they would be long passwords. And then SharePoint, 100 or more files deleted inside of 15 minutes. And then sneaking in right at the bottom there, Chmod 777 on Mac OS. Usually don't see that represented here.
Yeah, I wish I had some balloons and like confetti and stuff. Like, not that we should be super thrilled that people are getting these alerts, but this is one that I think this is Mac OS's first appearance on this list, so it's some kind of celebration. But yeah, the chmod stuff is just this one in particular is kind of like for all the Windows admins out there, is basically just like setting a particular file to everyone access, which is the equivalent of the 777. So that's one of those things that's kind of like maybe you don't want to do. Most of the time those are operational. People don't know what they're giving access to. Administrators are just doing, just do everything so that no matter where I am, it'll work. Like I don't need to troubleshoot it anymore. But some threat actors also do it obviously for similar reasons. Like they don't really care about your security. They'll just dump in whatever and then let it go. So this could be a good indicator of either some kind of misconfiguration or sysadmin doing something that maybe we should go back and clean up, or it could be an attacker trying to run something and just set some permissions so it's super easy to run it.
I think it's also a good reminder to just be mindful of your Mac environment. I think that there's sort of a inherited wisdom that comes from the long history of virus and malware primarily focusing on Windows devices, that you do still have security considerations to account for. And this is a great example of one that could certainly cause issues if not addressed. So, Dennis, I'm really excited to have you join this week. You and I know each other from when you joined and helped start Decipher, and then we got to do a little podcast for a bit, taking a look at hacking in the movies. But I wanted to have you join this week because I think that one of the best people to talk to about finding reliable information and sorting out truth from spin is to talk to a journalist. And literally yesterday, I was in an all-day workshop where we were talking about challenges that admins face out in the world at large. And one of them that I brought up is like in InfoSec, we're talking about an information landscape that is very biased. A lot of the reporting is coming from vendors that are talking about, their own services and products, like we saw in that CVE announcement from ASUS. And also where it's very factional, right? Like not even necessarily tied to a specific vendor, but Windows admins are going to have very strong feelings about other operating systems that can kind of color the feedback that they're giving. So I thought that to start with, what brought you into this space, InfoSec, as a journalist, and what kept you in it?
Yeah, I got started in tech journalism in 2000. I got a job as a staff writer at what was then PC Week magazine, which was, old school, like trade magazine, tons of fun, but it was a lot of like what you would expect is like the sort of like a lot of reporting on products of like, new Novell NetWare coming out, like what's new in that. And it happened like maybe about a year after I was there. The reporter who was covering security at the time left, and nobody wanted that beat. That tells you like there was nothing happening in security. Everybody wanted to cover Microsoft or IBM or Linux or something like
Pets.com.
Literally. Yeah. Honest to God, Zoe. And so I was like the new kid on the block, and I was like, you know what? I'd done some security stories already. I was like, that stuff's fun. Like lots of stuff happening all the time. It's never the same day twice. You're not just reporting on speeds and feeds and that kind of stuff. So I raised my hand and they were like, yeah, sure, whatever. No one cares. So that was in like 2001. And, 24 years later, I'm still doing it in one form or another. I went from eWeek to Tech Target. And then, as you mentioned earlier, started Threat Post at Kaspersky with my friend Ryan. And then later on started Decipher at Duo, which you were a big part of, Zoe, the launch and the whole thing. So I just love it. I mean, I think that's why all of us stick in security. There's lots of different ways you can go in tech, especially for, practitioners like you guys. But it's just such a really interesting and fascinating landscape. And in the time that I've been doing it, it's gone from this tiny little niche thing to literally stuff that's on the nightly news, like almost
Yeah.
every night, and so it's kind of this all encompassing thing. And it's a big part of everybody's lives, whether they work in tech or not. you're I'm sure we've all helped set up our, friends and parents, iPhones, and lock down their Windows PCs and all that kind of stuff, because the threats aren't just coming for enterprises, they're coming for consumers in a lot of cases. So the threat landscape is really broad and really deep. So there's, no shortage of things to do and think about and talk about all the time.
Yeah. That is, I mean, I think that like one of the most common shared traits wherever you are in this field is like curiosity and an interest in the new and the novel and wanting to understand it and like, pick up those things that you don't understand and look at them because there is always more. It's always expanding in breadth and in depth.
Yeah.
Um, that leads me to my next question. So, with things always changing, with there always kind of being new emerging threads, how do you keep up? How do you get your news?
For me, it's become this process over the years of kind of, like, I would say maybe 10 years ago, like when I was still at ThreatPost, we had such a like massive amount of news sources that we would look at every day to see what was interesting, what we maybe wanted to write about or do a podcast about. And just sort of by a process of elimination over time, kind of whittle that down to the trusted people and the trusted sources, which, is why we started Decipher at the time, Zoe, to become one of those. And I think it's just a function of time in the, time in the seat, as a pilot might say, like understanding who is um, not in it for the right reasons, but is giving you sort of unbiased information that you can trust on a specific topic, which is rarer and rarer in the general world and extremely rare in the tech world these days, especially security. Because as you mentioned, Zoe, every security advisory, like by definition, has a self-serving purpose. The
Mhm.
vendor is putting out information to help its customers, but it's also trying to cast that in the best light possible. Yes, we made a mistake. Yes, we have a bug, but it's not that bad. Here are some workarounds. Here's what you can do. Here's a patch. Go about your day. And in most cases, that's true. But there's also so much FUD still out there, and so
Mhm.
many like clickbait news sources and clickbait headlines where literally every story on the site is like, patch this now or die, all these skull and crossbones graphics, and like just everything is the end of the world. And it's almost impossible, even for educated, folks like us that have been doing this for a long time, to understand what's important and what's not. There's
Mhm.
so much being thrown in your face all the time. It really just comes down to finding those, handful of voices that you think you can trust, whether they're journalists or researchers, or in some cases vendors. I mean, there are vendors out there that are very transparent, very upfront about, any bugs that they have, any mistakes they've made, breaches that they've had that they own up to, and give you a, full transparency report, those kind of things. But it's a really difficult thing. I would say if you're a practitioner sitting in a SOC, um, every day trying to figure out what's important and what's not, I mean, that's a full-time job, let alone actually doing your job. And I do not envy those folks. So, I mean, I don't have a magic answer for how to find those sources, but I think it's really just a matter of like looking at the overall big picture, and then, over a period of weeks or months, trying to figure out exactly who seems to not be selling wolf tickets all the time and is actually giving you, actionable, usable information, like you all are trying to do every week.
Yeah. Well, and this came up a few weeks back where we were looking at a series of stories about Oracle, a news coming out that they had experienced a breach, them saying we absolutely didn't, more stories coming out that they were talking directly with customers about it. And then on the flip side, the claimed attacker releasing details and exaggerating, at least by their demonstrated details, exaggerating the extent to the information that they had. So a lot of times in these stories, you've got vendors with a strong motivation to downplay how serious something is, and in a lot of cases, either wanting to try and improve their chances of getting whatever they're after, getting that ransom, or to boost their cred and have a better, make themselves look bigger than they are. Attackers can exaggerate the other way. So, when you hear one of these announcements, what kind of makes your ears prick up? Like, what says, I feel like the truth may be in between these things?
The thing that always gets me, and I think this was the case in the Oracle incident from a few weeks ago, is when people are trying to play semantic word games, and
Yeah.
they start saying, well, no, this report is not true. Our XYZ platform was not breached. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was our ABC platform.
Right.
And it's okay, so that product name changed 6 months ago, but it's the same thing. I don't want to hear that. Like, be upfront, tell us, okay, we had an incident. We're looking into it right now. We're not entirely sure whether the researcher has all the information yet. We're looking into it. A 3-sentence statement that says, we understand there's some concern about this, we're looking into it, is so much better than the delay, succession style response to these things.
Yeah.
It's like, we've seen over the last 20 years how poorly that plays out when to go down the vulnerability research alley, when vendors start suing or bad mouthing researchers because they disclosed a bug in one of their products. Oracle was very famous for that for a long time, having a contentious relationship with security researchers, other vendors as well. That never really turns out very well, especially when the researchers have, the truth on their side and
Yeah.
can demonstrate it,
Yeah.
demonstrable proof. It gets into a tougher situation when you're talking about attackers who are the ones saying, here's our chat logs, or, here's our server logs that we logged into their cloud platform, or whatever it happens to be. That is really tough for journalists, because when you start communicating with those folks, it is a hall of mirrors that you cannot get out of. And there's lots of journalists that do good work in that area, and it's really difficult. And I give them a lot of kudos. It's a really, really hard thing to do, and do it well, because as soon as you start communicating with them and trying to gain their trust, is not the right word, but put some credence into what they're telling you, you're not going to really be able to independently verify what some threat actor, halfway around the world is telling you. And it's really, it's a bee's nest to go down that road. So to mix a whole bunch of metaphors, but that's a really difficult thing, especially for third parties looking at this. You say you're a customer trying to decide, do I trust my vendor? I guess I have to until proven otherwise. Or do I listen to what the attackers are saying and sort of go down this IR path if there's anything to be done? It's a really, really difficult situation for, everybody involved.
Yeah.
I love that call out, Dennis, of Oracle suing the security researchers. Compare that to Tesla, where they're giving you maybe $100,000 to identify a bug in their software. What vendor are you going to trust? The vendor that rewards the security vendor, or the one that punishes the security vendor?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been a big proponent of bug bounties, even, years and years ago. They're certainly not a cure-all, and not every company is remotely ready to start a bug bounty program. Go ask Katie Masura, she'll tell you. But everybody should at least have some sort of, playbook for responding to a researcher. You can't just have a security at email address and turn it into a black hole. That's worse than not having it in the first place. Have some sort of process, even if it's, an intern that is responding with a thank you for your email, we'll get back to you. You need to have some sort of public facing response process. Otherwise, things are going to go badly for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and the irony is, I think the hesitance in being transparent about these issues is a fear that it will result in lost trust. But I see a breach or an incident is on a long enough time scale inevitable, but I will have more or less trust based on what that disclosure looks like, and the absence of it is certainly not going to give me a stronger sense of trust.
I completely agree. We have, I would say between 15 and 20 years of evidence that on a long enough time scale, breaches, publicly disclosed breaches do not really affect public opinion about companies or their stock price in general. It may take a hit for a few months, and there's outliers, of course. But if you go look at the companies that have had massive, Target, um, TJX a long time ago, and even more recent ones, they will have dips, but it always comes back. Consumers tend to, and enterprise consumers as well, tend to look at the companies more favorably when they, as you said, Zoe, come out and say, yep, we had an incident. I mean, everybody has incidents. We just talked through some of the biggest companies in the world that had serious security problems, right? Everybody has incidents. And, it's like a kid getting in trouble. You're far better off coming into the house and telling your mom, yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I broke the neighbor's window with the baseball, than having the neighbor come over and tell you,
Right.
just let people know, and you're gonna be far better off.
And
Yeah.
I wanted to say too, there's a very good, a timely incident that happened just I think yesterday, maybe the day before, where Steam was apparently breached, and like a whole bunch of different publications were just going off the rail with it and making all these wild assumptions. And then Steam comes back literally yesterday, and they said they're still looking into it, but in their release, in their document, they're literally so confident that nothing's affected that they're not even asking people to reset their passwords. And that's when I was like, okay, well, at least like that's enough for me to be like, they know what's going on. Like, because how easy is it to recommend just resetting your password? Just like,
Right.
no, don't even do it. Don't even worry about it. We're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can think of, several times in my career where I've had stories written about, something like that, Jake, sitting in the CMS or sitting in my Google Doc, and I'm ready to hit the button, and I'm like, you know what? This doesn't smell right. Or, you know what? Let me talk to that PR person again and just make sure, or talk to the researcher again and make sure that something here is not lining up. And 100 times out of 100, if I didn't publish, I've never been sorry about not publishing a story.
Right.
Lots, plenty of times you publish and you're like, damn it. I, got this one detail wrong. Got to go in and fix it. Luckily things are easily fixable now, but plenty of outlets you look at now, they will write a 2-paragraph story that turns out to be, if not, completely inaccurate, like, somewhat inaccurate. And then they'll just write in, depending on the outlet, just completely rewrite it,
Yeah.
or, maybe correct it a little bit. And there don't seem to be a lot of consequences. I mean, this is inside journalism nonsense, but like, a lot of those places don't have editors and copy editors and things like that looking at this stuff, and fact checkers. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think there's a correlation there that I have a little bit more trust in an outlet that is transparent about correction notices.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if there's something that you have to fix later, or you have to put an update up top, like, I would rather see that than go back and suddenly see that the information being shared has changed.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure to get to this story. So we'll include links for a couple others that we were looking at for this week. But rather than do a walkthrough of a attack or an incident this week, I really liked this article on applying maintenance to detection engineering, recognizing that, over time, after you've defined a detection, it may have increased false positives because of changes made in subsequent updates, or have a new blind spot that didn't apply at the time that it was developed, or if it hasn't been documented at the time that it was created and that institutional knowledge isn't still there, it can create more confusion than clarity down the line. This idea that maintenance deferred is tech debt reserved, right? And so the author of this article said, if you are going to treat detection as code, if you're going to kind of work within this paradigm and treat detections as software artifacts that need to be managed, then some fundamental principles about maintenance and documentation and testing and validation kind of naturally follow from that view. The article lays out 4 kind of main categories of maintenance: corrective, something's broken, we got to fix it; adaptive, needing updates to remain functional with some new software requirements. These can be proactive, but usually they're reactive. Perfective, fine-tuning, oftentimes this is going to be more proactive. Sometimes it's feedback or request-driven. And then my favorite, because it means that we're keeping things in line, is preventative, having scheduled maintenance and reviews, planning out that review and maintenance, trying to identify and address potential issues before they become issues. And one of the quotes in this article that I really liked is that maintenance is often the hardest job and at the same time the least glamorous. So, Jake, I thought you might have a couple of ideas real quick on how teams can shift from more reactive to proactive maintenance. If they aren't doing detection engineering on their own, also just in the context of security operations more broadly.
Yeah, my first response to this article was because it says no one is talking about maintenance and detection engineering. I was kind of like, who's not talking about it? But that's only because I'm just so always that's my day to day is just talking about the health of these detections. But yeah, so it all relies on kind of like metrics, and I know that's not a really super fun topic or thing to like really get your head around. But you have to understand like certain things about like the performance of things that you have, like the performance of the detections that you currently have like, running. You should understand things like when things happen, if a detection is if it's generating too much more noise, like more noise than it should be, maybe there's more false positives being introduced because I don't know, someone's workflow changed, and now all of a sudden they're throwing all of these alerts for one person. And maybe if you're monitoring your detections and one's not firing as much as it should, maybe there's something that changed in the logs, and there could be like a missed true positive event. We see that with Microsoft logs from time to time, where they like to kind of mess around with a lot of things behind the scenes. And of course, they're not going to tell us. We just have to be aware of these things when they change them. We have to be proactive about these things. So it's all about, in our case, it's all about testing our detections, and a lot like something that people are more familiar with probably is testing your backups. Like, how do you know these things are working if you never test them?
Yeah.
So that's one of those things that like, no matter what you're trying to work on or what you're trying to do, just like measuring what you've got and being able to like observe those measurements and make some plans around them.
Absolutely.
And additionally too, like detection engineering in anything in security is not like a 0 to 100 miles per hour. You have to kind of crawl, walk, run. And if there's any detection engineers listening, or maybe anybody working with detections, there is a good maturity matrix specifically for detection engineering that I reference from time to time. And it's all about, it starts at defined, it goes on to managed, and then to optimized. And I think a lot of people, what we're talking about here is a lot of people get defined, they get there, and then they're like, that's good enough, or I don't have enough time to do the rest of it. But it is important to kind of like eventually graduate up through those steps. So it's not always about like being perfect at the beginning, but it's about making those like conscious efforts to get better over time.
Yeah, that sounds like a great resource. So, Jake, I'll grab that from you and make sure that we share it out in the descriptions. To our viewers, I'm trying to figure out a good way to share the show notes so that we can have some more extensive sharing to those advisories, CVE pages, and other resources like that one that Jake just mentioned. I am about to get kicked out here, so we're going to have to close it out for this week. But thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Dennis, for kind of helping us break the seal and being our first guest here on Briefings. Thank you to Jake and Nick for coming back and sharing your expertise. Team, any last thoughts or takeaways that you want to leave folks with?
Oh, thanks for joining us, Dennis.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And to everyone, we'll be seeing you next Friday, 1 p.m. for the next edition of Blumira Briefings. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay safe out there.